So our champions will be going home with ₦500,000. A round of applause for our champions. Team B, from where? What school is this? What school is this? What school is this? What school is this? Come on now.
The Nigerian economy is like the myth of Sisyphus and its rolling stone. We keep pushing and pushing for growth in our economy, and yet we find ourselves exactly where we began, which is nowhere at all. Therefore, we are here today to make recommendations that will not only allow us to push for economic growth, but to actually remain at our peak.
The Nigerian budget to GDP ratio is at a 12.2% and the lowest in Africa. This is despicable when you compare the giant of Africa with nations like Egypt and South Africa that sit at a higher pedestal. It means then that we have a lot more to do as a nation.
But what is also clear is that the Nigerian current fiscal strategies have triggered neither economic growth nor economic development. And this is due to the salient issues confronting the country as a whole, which include but not limited to insecurity, infrastructure deficit, poor human capital development, macroeconomic instability, and a weak manufacturing sector, leading to an invariably weakened tax-to-GDP ratio. Now that we've identified these challenges, it is important to reimagine the fiscal strategies that Nigeria currently practices.
Because Nigeria's economic problems are enormous and you can't solve them overnight, it only makes sense that the answers and strategies to solve this problem are layered into three: short-term, medium-term, and long-term.
We are coming up with a new strategy for fiscal policy. And this is highlighted on the three major parts of fiscal policy or fiscal strategy, right? So revenue generation, resource allocation, debt management, and then we'll look at SDG later. Now, for revenue generation, diversification. If you could diversify our revenue, you have more, right? So how do we diversify our revenue?
We are your hosts for today, and we feel elated to be in this room filled with individuals with limitless potentials ready to change the world.
Thank you very much. We'll be having the presentation aspects of the NTD, and the topic is Reimagining Fiscal Strategies for Economic Growth and Development. Reimagining Fiscal Strategies for Economic Growth and Development. So from the previous round, we have the following teams that made it. We have Team B, Team C, Team D, and Team E. So please, those teams will listen to the following instructions as our judges will begin to prepare to grade you. So each team will have 2 speakers in this round, and you'll be given a total of 10 minutes. 10 minutes for this round to make your presentation. Then after your presentation, you'll be having a Q&A session. So we'll take from your contestants, fellow contestants, and we'll take from our judges. So first up, we'll be having Team E. A round of applause for them as they come on stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like us all to think as children today. Let us lie outside beneath the stars and envision and reimagine the Nigeria of our dreams. The reason I want us to think like children is because we want to keep this simple. As my generation would say, too much shalaye, they reduce these. So this is important. We know that Nigeria's problems are a lot. I mean, they say that if someone tries to explain Nigeria's problems to you and you understand it, the person probably didn't explain it properly. So we've been able to streamline these problems into 3 major issues to provide solutions that are interchangeably with all those issues. To the first issue, budget priorities. The Nigerian budget to GDP ratio is at a 12.2% and the lowest in Africa. This is despicable when you compare the giant of Africa with nations like Egypt and South Africa that sit at a higher pedestal. It means then that we have a lot more to do as a nation. The reason why you have those beautiful numbers there as regards a 9.18 trillion deficit and a 31.9% deficit financing is because Nigeria owes, depending on who you ask, between 78 trillion to 1.22 trillion in debt. The problem with that is if you do the calculation, it means then that every one of us here would have to pay as high as 400,000 naira to be able to cover Nigeria's debt issues. I love my country, but if I try to withdraw 400K now, it cannot go. Next, however, is SME sustainability. For us to understand why it's an issue to have SMEs sustained is when you characterize how much of a contribution the SME market provides within our society today. The first is the idea that they contribute 48% of the GDP currently. This is outstanding, based off of reports by Statistica and the rest. Also, 84% of employment currently in Nigeria is being provided for by SMEs across the country. This means, despite the large contributions of these individuals, you have an underrepresentation of these SMEs within the tax bracket. How so? In 2022, Statistica says that Nigeria has over 38.4 million businesses. Ask CAC and they will tell you that they were able to register less than 6 million of those startups. What happened to the other 32.4 million? It means then, the reason for this is because of the lack of proper tax accountability. Next is, you have these guys contributing you have a lot of these guys failing within status quo, right? Because you have 95% of startups failing after 5 years. This is problematic because when you have that large number of individuals contributing to your economy and you cannot sustain them, you cannot attain economic growth and development. The next issue is on tax evasion. This is a recurring problem. Between 2017 and 2021, just 5 years, Nigeria lost over 5.217 trillion. Over the last 2 years, there's been an over 10% increase in tax collation, but that is still not enough when you look at the big picture. And that is why we think these policies that we've brought up will solve this problem. This is why we set up, in the spirit of being simple, we set up a 3-point agenda model, which is the SPD model. First is SME sustenance, public-private collaboration, and debt for climate swaps. So the first issue, SME Business Sustenance Fund. What does this fund look like? First of all, we think that this fund's primary purpose, one, is to put more money in the hands of SMEs. Because, first of all, the reasons why they go through those 95% failure is because of things like double-digit inflation, high cost of operations, and multiple taxation, and even taxation by non-state actors. This means that we need to have a process that incentivizes them to want to pay tax, one, and also to keep them on a longer lifespan. The administration of this fund shall be continued by SMEDAN already in status quo, who already have a consolidation of current existing SMEs. So we think that structure is great. SMEDAN shall now offer interest-free loans as against its current status quo, where it offers a single-digit interest loan. We think that this is important. Why? Because regardless of the existence of that single digit, we've still not had the buy-ins that we want from SMEs. The next is that we think that SMEs that on selection, we think that SMEs to be selected are ones that will be formalized. This answers the questions as to the informal sector issue that we have in Nigeria. So to be able to formalize them, we are simply saying, come register and you have access to these funds. Next is we think that priority should be given to SMEs that contribute to employment. And to be honest, the indigenous production that happens in Nigeria is largely done by SMEs, because these are the farmers, these are individuals that use the local products. And lastly, to see that the import market competition is reduced, we intend to place a 50% increase in already existing import taxes. That way, we reduce competition and we incentivize individuals to go local. What then is the way we plan to finance this plan? And it's simple. SMEs shall have all taxes and levies unified. Solve the problem of multiplicity of taxes, and then this revenue exclusively is used to fund the SBSF. Next is SMEDAN in partnership with Bank of Industry, who already have an existing mandate to cater for small and medium businesses across the world, will be able to create a mutual fund agreement similar to the existing ones between SMEDAN and state governments. What do we achieve with this? First, a reduction in SME failures, which means if we're able to reduce the 95% of individuals who fail within 5 years to a possible 50%, we think that that's a lot of money that is going to come in form of taxes for the state and a lot of economic growth and development. Secondly, we think that we will achieve substantive progress in formalizing the informal sector. Because then, when these guys find out that one, you're not taxing them multiply and you're taking actions against non-state actors, there is an incentive for them to join you and give you money and also grow within the vast majority of instances. The last one is encouraging local production while inducing import on competing goods. It means then, if those goods are producible within Nigeria, we think then that we should prioritize individuals that are producing them locally. Thank you.
John Maynard Keynes, one of the most influential economists of the 21st century, believed significantly that at times of economic depression, the governments must significantly prioritize its spending. Our policies 2 and 3 cater to this. What is our policy number 2? What our policy number 2 simply seeks to do is establish a collaboration between the private and the public sector in infrastructure-related matters. Currently, the RITC, that is the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme, necessarily gives companies that want the ability to use up to 50% of their tax liability to fund road projects that are either prospective, that is in the future, or currently ongoing. What we seek to do simply is restructure the RITC in a number of respects. One, we want to extend the scope of the RITC to other forms of infrastructure, road, electricity, even oil refining. Every single infrastructure that necessarily influences the carrying out of business within the Nigerian climate. But then secondly, we want to create a system where companies have the liberty to give up to 100% of their company income taxes, particularly for this cost. So we are removing the 50% hallmark in this particular regard. What we seek to do then is establish a system where, for example, the FIRS still gets to regulate the activities of the RITC, given that it's obviously on tax matters. But then secondly, the RITC also gets to give power to taxpayers to be able to necessarily decide how their taxes are used. The important thing here is that taxpayers get to decide how their taxes are used, and the import and the impact here is simply the fact that in the instance where they get to decide how their taxes are used, they are way more likely and way more incentivized to necessarily want to pay tax, because when you know you have the power to decide this tax will be used this particular way, I definitely would want to pay this particular tax. That's the incentive that we create. But then secondly, we create for a system where better infrastructure is necessarily created in that particular regard. Policy number 3, the debt for climate swap. It is innovative. You've never heard it before. It is simple, yeah? You owe the United States $100 billion. A third party comes to you and says, we will buy your loan of $100 million from you and pay up the United States, but then we would impose an obligation on you to carry out climate-friendly policies. That is what we want Nigeria to seek at this point, where it's experiencing extreme sinking in debt, as my partner here analyzed. What we simply want to do is take out these agreements that necessarily foster the energy sector. That is, we want to rejuvenate the energy sector and ensure that there's a significant extent of government attention that is necessarily drawn to it. But then secondly, we want to, even if it is minimally, service the debt that we owe. Because obviously at this point in time, we can't say there is any help that is useless. We can literally use all the help that we can get in this particular regard. The debt for climate swap is definitely the way to go. Nigeria of our dreams cannot come easy. We must struggle. Everybody here did tap swap, I'm sure. We must tap until the Nigeria we want is achieved.
So right about now, we're taking questions from the contestants. If you have any questions for Team E. Question from the judges.
Thank you for your presentation. So I have just a short question. I think I heard the second speaker mention that your team recommends that RITC would be able to be treated as per 100% of the income tax of companies. Would that be correct? Okay, so that's right. I'm sorry? You want companies to have the option to pay 100% for the purpose of RITC. Yes, I'm interested in knowing how practical you think that is, if every person has the discretion to choose where they want their tax to be channeled. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if every other person in the room says they want to channel it to road infrastructure, what happens to other areas? What happens to other things that the government needs liquidity for? Just to question that.
Going by your presentation, I look at it as if it's actually one-sided, as in you're looking more on the part of government. Whereas in taxation, there are two parts, the taxpayers and the relevant authority, as the case may be. It might be the FRS or the state's IRS. Now, if all you've stated is actually for the government to do their part, what will the other stakeholder, which is the public, I mean the taxpayer, what should they do? because it is a biosystem. They all exist collectively. One cannot exist without the other. So what should the taxpayer, what should they do to actually re-strategize or to place this, to make the strategy work for the country? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, sir. So the first question from my Honorable Sir on how we provide for other areas in which the government needs liquidity for. There are two responses to this, sir. The first is that company income taxes are exclusively the only taxes to which we refer. The government has other means of acquiring taxes from companies like withholding taxes and value-added taxes. In addition to that, the government also has mechanisms of generating funds from other sources of revenue. What we believe so strongly is that infrastructural development is a very key sector of the economy that necessarily fosters business. Why we prioritize it and exclusively accord the company income taxes to it is because it is the core on which businesses necessarily run. In fact, according to the Ease of Doing Business Index of 2023, infrastructure, particularly electricity, was one of the top considerations as to what factors, components, compose the ease of doing business in any countries. But then secondly, we think that even in instances where the government allocates in instances where companies get to disproportionately select certain projects on which they want to invest, the committee is also there to regulate, because the RITC currently is run by the RITCC, which is the committee that necessarily regulates it. It has the ability to alter the decisions of the selections of companies on a number of bases, one of which is in the instance where it is in the interest of equity, that is to say where we want to effect even distribution across various sectors of the economy or across various areas of the various states of the country to ensure that every state or every sector gets significant amount of share in that particular regard. I don't know if I answered the question, sir.
As to the roles of the citizens, so we think that first of all, when you create incentives for individuals to give you their money with a promise of the fact that, one, their business is going to grow, two, they will have more disposable income, three, they will feel less the brunt of the economic situation worldwide, there is more incentive for these individuals to want to pay tax. However, we think that there's more awareness as to the power of taxation in recent times. Obviously, more still needs to be done. But we think that the creation of that incentive is what will drive these guys to act and repay government with those taxes that they're expected to pay.
So, thank you for your presentation. I hear you talk about companies' income tax, right? I think your presentation has basically looked at companies not operating in the oil and gas sector. So what do you have for a company that, or an investor that wants to come into the oil and gas sector? Because if you're talking about companies' income tax, basically, except you have converted to the PIA, you are not, companies in the petroleum sector do not pay, or in the industry do not pay companies' income taxes. So is your proposal not lopsided? Are you not just looking at people in a sector and not looking at the other sector? So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
The ITCS intends to operate on the existing structures pertaining to tax incentives that exist for across different sectors. So yes, for example, in the agricultural sector, there is a significant extent of tax incentive that exists. We don't think we want to modify that. We think sufficient revenue is going to be generated from other companies, given there is no sector in particular that is 100% excluded from taxation. But beside that, the oil and gas sector is a very core sector of the Nigerian economy. So the Nigerian government and the Nigerian populace indirectly get to derive certain levels of very strong utilities from that particular sector.
Please, a round of applause for Team E. So right now we'll be having Team D. Team D, please make your way up stage. The topic remains the same: reimagining fiscal strategies for economic growth and development. And you have just 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, distinguished judges and esteemed audience. Section 14, subsection 2B declares that the primary purpose of the government is to provide for the welfare and security of its people. But the fact that that is far from reality check is obvious to everyone seated here today. According to the National Bureau of Labor Statistics, 6 out of every 10 Nigerians live in multidimensional poverty. According to UNICEF, 18 million children are currently out of school. As if that is not enough, Nigeria's current inflation rate is at its highest in almost 3 decades. As a matter of fact, only 1 out of 3 students seated in this hall today will remain employed upon graduation due to the despicable unemployment rate we currently face. But let's take a step back to the fundamental ideas of this presentation. What are fiscal strategies? Fiscal strategies refer to the plans and the policies implemented by a government to manage its finances and achieve its economic and development goals. What is economic growth? Economic growth describes how much a country is increasing and improving its goods and services. Economic development. Economic development is a process of improving the quality of life in a country. Now, back to my grievances. We've seen the definition of fiscal strategies, that it is clear. We've also seen the benchmark of economic growth and development, that it is clear. But what is also clear is that the Nigerian current fiscal strategies have triggered neither economic growth nor economic development. And this is due to the salient issues confronting the country as a whole, which include but not limited to insecurity, infrastructure deficit, poor human capital development, macroeconomic instability, and a weak manufacturing sector, leading to an invariably weakened tax to GDP ratio. Now that we've identified these challenges, it is important to reimagine the fiscal strategies that Nigeria currently practices. And to lead me on this journey, and everyone in general, on this journey of reimagination, welcome my co-speaker.
Thank you very much. Because Nigeria's economic problems are enormous, and you can't solve them overnight, it only makes sense that the answers and strategies to solve this problem are layered into 3: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So to start with, short-term fiscal strategies. Fiscal strategies. Number 1, revenue enhancement through tax reform. Currently, Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio is hovers around 10%. This is less than the 15% regional average and the 15% recommendation of the World Bank. Now, in spite of this, Nigeria has over 60 forms of taxes officially, and unofficially, this number increases, so it goes as high as 200. So what do we need to do differently? Number 1 is that we need to introduce a single-digit tax regime. Why? In 2022. Even though Nigeria has so many taxes, right? Less than 10 of these taxes account for over 90% of the country's tax revenue. What this shows that by introducing a single-digit tax regime, the government can effectively focus on these particular taxes to reduce the number of people that are able to evade taxes, right? And at the same time, it is going to reduce the barriers that currently, the barriers that medium and small-scale enterprises currently face. At the same time, we need to introduce a unified tax collection window. Secondly, is that we need to have expenditure rationalization to reduce fiscal deficits. What do we need to do in terms of this? 1, we need to eliminate waste in public spending. And 2, we need to reduce the cost of governance. By doing this, we'll be able to save billions of naira. We can then be invested into critical sector that will trigger economic growth and development. And at the same time, this is important because it's to enable the government to garner public support, which is essential for any administration looking to embark on critical economic support, critical economic reforms. Thirdly, social safety nets. No doubt, Nigeria currently has a social welfare program. However, this program has failed, as we have seen, in terms of various corruption cases, like what we have with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. But what we need to do differently is that, which means that the poorest of the poor, the vulnerable people who actually need this support, are not getting them. But what we need to do is that we need to digitize the social support, the social welfare program. By digitizing it, we'll be able to ensure that it's those that actually need this help that are getting them. And the argument that Nigeria has a lot of unbanked population no longer work. Because with the emergence of new banks, we now have a situation where as long as you have a mobile number, you can have a bank account. Moving on to the medium-term fiscal strategies. Number 1, we need to look at expenditure optimization. When we talk about expenditure optimization, the government needs to begin to really use the budget as a fiscal instrument. And what do we need to do differently in terms of this? We need to eliminate what some experts now call the sachetization of the Nigerian economy. The Nigerian budget should be designed to address key infrastructural deficits that the country faces. Take, for instance, the budget of the federal government should not be used to, say, construct borrow in rural communities. The federal government's budget should focus on critical infrastructure that will trigger economic growth and development in the country. Now, it's not that we are not saying we should neglect all these minor infrastructural projects, right? But we are saying that this one should then be addressed, and it should be addressed by government at the subnational level, that is the state and the local governments. Then, at the same time, we also need to, in terms of tax revenue optimization on the medium term, we need to increase our level of investment into human capital development. Across all human capital index that matters, Nigeria currently ranks very low. The country's per capita spending on education is less than the average in sub-Saharan Africa, which itself has one of the lowest average in the world. Right? The country's performance on all other index, education and healthcare, are a far cry. But what should we do differently? Is that we need to increase the level of investment into this sector. Only then can we address the fundamental issues that are responsible for some of the problems that affect the level of productivity in the economy, like insecurity, which can, especially in northern Nigeria, which can be tied to the high level of out-of-school children there. And secondly, is that we need to implement vigorous monitoring and evaluation of this human capital investment. See, over the years, even though we've had a situation whereby the level of investment into this sector is minimal, this minimal investment has not produced the desired results because of corruption and lack of transparency. So what we need to do differently is that we need to introduce a vigorous monitoring process, improve the public procurement process to ensure that government and public get the desired results for every dollar or every naira they spend. Now, moving on to long-term fiscal strategies. Now, the long-term fiscal strategies are divided into two. The first one is economic diversification. Currently, less than 20% of Nigeria's export figure comes from oil sector. What this tells us is that the Nigerian economy is heavily reliant on its health sector. But what we should do differently, and the effect of this is, aside the fact that this is problematic in the short term, in the long term, as the global order moves towards a greener future, it means that the future of the Nigerian economy is even bleaker than what we have today. So what should we do differently? Number one, we should introduce tax incentives to promote local content in manufacturing. See, no doubt. What determines the strength of an economy or enables an economy to grow and develop is not in the availability of raw materials. It's in the ability of that economy to effectively add means of production to these raw materials, to then provide goods and services that will lead to utilities, right? And then export these goods and services. Right, so what that means is that the government needs to provide incentives that will enable local content, that will enable the local content and manufacturing sector to be able to effectively engage these available resources and lead to the creation of utility. Secondly, we need to have increased investment in critical sector like power and transportation. All over the world, especially in developed countries, you can do a linear line between the quality of power in the country and the strength of its transportation sector and the level of economic activity that exists in that country. So what do we need to do differently? The government needs to invest critically in this sector, because by investing in power and transportation sector, we'll be able to boost economic activities at every level and every nook and cranny of the society. Thirdly is that we need to enhance our digital infrastructure. By doing this, we'll be creating an enabling environment for innovation and technological advancement to thrive. And then the second aspect of this long-term fiscal strategy is fiscal federalism. We need to increase the level of fiscal independence to subnational governments. State governments should know, and at the same time, state governments should no longer rely almost exclusively on allocation from the federal government to carry out their fiscal responsibility. That's one. Two, for local governments, the allocation from the federal government to local government should no longer go to state government, and then state government governors now decide whether or not they should give the money to local government. The local government is an independent sphere of government. So what should the government we should have a situation whereby the local government as the total government has its own fiscal independence. And at the same time, to ensure that we're able to boost the level of financial resources available to the local government to embark on projects and carry out its fiscal responsibilities, we need to eliminate the zonal intervention projects, popularly known as constituency projects, that federal lawmakers carry out. Lawmakers should focus on the business of lawmaking. Then the hundreds of billions of naira that they get in constituency projects that they then use for political pedalism and to reward political associates can be added to the money that the federal government allocates to the local governments. So you then have a situation whereby the local government, this is the total of government, have increased financial resources to carry out critical projects that are critical at their respective level of government. And this is going to enable, and it is going to reduce the barriers that currently exist for medium and small-scale enterprises at this level. In conclusion, we have presented to you a blueprint for the Nigeria we seek. But to get there, we must take active steps to ensure we get there. Only then can we walk to the Nigeria of our dream. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll be taking questions from the contestants. Contestants, do you have any questions for Team D?
Yes, Team D. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. My question is simple, but the first context. The budget from 2023 shows the following statistics. Debt servicing, 8.27 trillion was allocated to it. Expenditure 9.99 trillion was allocated to it. Statutory transfers 1.7 trillion was allocated to it. Capital expenditure was not significantly attended to, right? And the simple reason is not that the government does not know that Nigeria needs to develop infrastructurally. It's simply the fact it does not have the funds. Strategies are meant to create a form of balance. Show why we should give tax incentive, show how we can automatically create investments in sectors that the government did not initially create investments. Despite its knows, it has to create investments in these sectors.
So, well done. I like your presentation, but I have a quick question. You talked about, in your short term, you talked about expenditure optimization. Medium term, you talked about expenditure rationalization. How do you want to rationalize these two concepts, you know, in the short and medium term means? How do you think this will help, you know, the government in ensuring that the people get the desired returns of governance?
All right, thank you very much, sir.
I hope you understand my question.
Yeah, I do. To start with, regarding your question about the fact that the problem is not that the government does not know it needs to increase its investment into capital projects, but the problem is that there's no money. It's why when you look at the strategies I presented, I did not talk about that under short-term strategies. Under short-term strategies, I talked about under short-term strategy, I talked about expenditure rationalization to reduce fiscal deficit, which then in the long term increase the level of public support in this the level of public support that the government is going to get so that it can embark on critical reforms. I did not begin to talk about that until when we get to medium and long-term strategies. That tells you that, like I said in my speech, the problem we are facing is not simple. So the solution that we prefer must not be simple. It must be planned, and it must be strategic, and it must be timed. Then to your question, sir, you talked about, as your question is about expenditure optimization and expenditure rationalization. Now, they are interwoven, right? But for expenditure the first one, which we have under the short-term strategies, which is expenditure rationalization. Now, it's going to lay the framework for expenditure and for the second one. Because what this seeks to achieve really is that, because to be honest, the problem Nigeria's economy faces is in the trillions. So even if you cut the cost of governance, what you are going to get is at most hundreds of billions, right? So that means that even if you cut the cost of governance, it's not, the money you are going to save is not enough to solve all our economic problems. So, but at the same time, it is in the short term, it's important. Because, for instance, when last year when the federal government announced the student loan scheme, it's allocated almost the same amount of money at that time, 5 billion naira, that it's allocated for student loan was what it allocated for a simple yard for the president. Right? So that means that this money in the short term can actually have important effect. It can actually trigger important changes in the system. But on the long term, the money you are saving from that is still not going to be enough. Right? So that's when in the medium term, I then talk about expenditure optimization, which is where I then talk about the budget as a fiscal instrument. So that this time, you are not just talking about rationalizing it. You are talking about getting the optimum results for every naira that the federal government spends. It's why I say, okay, we are saying that the federal government should not spend the federal government of Nigeria, for example, has no business constructing a borehole in the Shagam. When they are subnational governments, like the state and local government that can do that. So every naira, the money the federal government is spending on infrastructure, for instance, should go to critical infrastructural projects that will have substantial effect on the economy at the national level. I believe that answers your question, sir.
When we talk about tax, I don't want us to approach this issue like the layman or the man on the streets. We're academia, we're in an institution of learning. So when we are making all this kind of assertion or when we are professing solution, we should be sure of the things we say. So looking at the the solutions you talk about, let me just quickly talk about it. Single digits. You talk about single digits for taxation. I think, or I'm sure that a lot of developed nations, they tax at double digits, and not just double digits, but a very high one, as high as 40-something%. So reducing this tax rates to single digits, how are you sure that it's going to place our economy, is going to put us strategically on a road to development. Because whether you like it or not, most of the developed countries that doesn't even have mineral resources, oil and gas, or they are not as blessed as Nigeria, they still survive. And Nigeria runs to that place. How do they do it? It's tax. So when you now reduce this to single digits, how exactly do you think is going to solve Nigerian problem? That's one. Then second,
On that single digit, I need you to be clear. Are you talking about single digit in terms of tax rate or single digit in terms of numbers of taxes?
Single digit in terms of number of taxes.
okay, I can still address that when you want to talk about a single digit in terms of number of taxes. There's actually a schedule for all these taxes. There are some that are collected by local governments, the one collected by states and federal. And if you follow the breakdown, some of these taxes, they are actually levies. They are not, let me say, we just call it levies and tax. And when you are now going to, everything is going to accumulate into the company income tax, the CIT. But you need to realize that most of these levies are actually deductible expenses. They are allowed. You must have deducted before you arrive at your final tax. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they are taxes. They are deductible, they are expenses. So we just need to look at that holistically before we reach a conclusion. But thank you for pointing out that. I don't want to talk about another one that I saw in your medium term. You said increase revenue by expanding tax brackets. And in the same vein, you said new tax regime that eliminates levies in informal sector. And the question I want to pose to you is, how can these two operate in a single strategy? We all know that bulk of this tax lies in the informal sector, because in the formal sector, the payee and all the whatsoever have captured it already. If you don't withdraw, if you don't collect this tax as source, then the companies, these companies and organizations that operate in the formal sector will bear the liability eventually during audits. But the bulk of the problem is in the informal sector. And you are now proposing that they should eliminate levies in informal sector and harmonize tax system across board. I think that needs a lot of fine-tuning. So I don't know if you will be able to provide a context to that. And in this expenditure optimization, I don't know what you mean by sachetization of the economy. So I indulge me, maybe you should just tell us what that means. So overall, like the same question I posed to the first team, all this is speaking to the government's part. What exactly do we expect of the citizens, the taxpayer? They are part of the tax ecosystem. What should they do? It is not only about government. What should the taxpayers do to help us reposition this tax and Nigeria, all these fiscal strategies and everything of you that you've mentioned? Thank you very much.
On the question of single digit tax regime, even though Nigeria has unofficially as high as 200 forms of taxes, less than 10 of these taxes account for over 90% of the country's tax revenue. So it is based on this. Fact that we are proposing that we should reduce the number of taxes that we have to a single digits. So by doing that, because when you look at some of the taxes that exist outside, we have a lot of taxes that can actually be harmonized into a single one. For example, we have there's especially which has been a proliferation now, where the federal government introduces a form of tax, and then they say, okay, this tax is for this particular thing. It's going to come from, say, 1% of the money that a company in certain classes actually gain, or their their revenue manually. The problem with that is that it's exploitative in a way. If you want to increase the company income tax, let's do that. If you want to have, because again, all of these taxes can actually be harmonized. They are basically taxes, right? And they can be harmonized, right? So, and especially within the context of the fact that even though we have a lot of them, less than 10 of them actually account for over 90% of the tax revenue we have. Then secondly, regarding increased revenue by expanding the tax bracket and a tax regime that eliminates levies in the informal sector. Now, the problem with the informal sector is that, yeah, we have a lot of levies, which in a way, by the standard definition of taxation, in a way, some of them do not qualify as a tax. But the problem is that the fact that we have this levy, a lot of these levies, there's so many procedures because of the nature of the Nigerian state currently. There's so much leakage in this system. So by harmonizing the process and ensuring that we have a unified system, we can have a situation whereby we eliminate the leakage that actually exists in the taxes that we get from the informal sector. Because there are a lot of taxes and levies in the informal sector for bus drivers, for market men and women, that a significant percentage of these taxes does not get to the government. So let's harmonize the system. Let's have a unified structure that this is the amount we are taxing this particular set of people. This is how they pay. That was also going to, in a way, involve a digitization process for how the informal sector pay taxes. And it's a good thing that we've had increased digitization of identity, NIN, and all of that over the years. So this is going to make it easier for the government to be able to effectively do that. Then regarding the second component of it, which is increase revenue by expanding the tax bracket. Now, because it's under the medium term, it's tied to what we propose in the short term. Now, we said in the short term that we want to have a situation. We said in the short term that we want to have. We said in the short term that we want to have a single tax regime and a unified tax collection window. Now, so all of these are laying the foundation for that in the sense that by doing that, the people that don't pay tax in the formal sector, it becomes harder to evade taxation. So it's also tied to single-digit tax regime. When we have a single-digit tax regime, it's easier for the government to focus to effectively address the problem of tax evasion. That's what I mean by that. And thirdly, on sachetization, it's why, under the medium term, it's why I put the term sachetization in quotes. So basically, what sachetization really means is that it's just like when you look at the emergence of certain products, let's say goods, and when the producer discovered that certain people can't afford a size, they then create a smaller size to be able to so that these people will be able to afford it. So now, in that context, so sachetization here is a metaphorical representation of this. When you look at, take for instance, in the 2020, in the latest budget of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Ministry of Money Affairs allocated billions of naira to provide boreholes and carry out empowerment projects for people in Akwa Ibom State, specifically the constituency of the Senate President. We believe that for Nigeria to actually effectively, we also have to, if we are talking about fiscal strategy that is going to ensure that we're able to address the problems we face, the federal government has no business doing all of those things. There's a reason why there's a government, there are subnational government, state government, and local government. It's also why in the long term, we then came back to expand on this by proposing that, see, the money that these federal lawmakers then get, all these billions and hundreds of naira that we use for political propagandism and reward political patronage, let's then add it to the resources that go directly into local government so that they're able to do this directly. Thank you very much, sir.
A round of applause for Team D. So please, let's clap and make a round of applause for Team C as they come on stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, as we have it already, I would just want to quickly take our minds back as to how we arrived at fiscal strategies. All right, thank you very much. So the advent of fiscal strategies in Nigeria, as we can see it depicted, it was broken down into three: the pre-oil, the oil, and the oil boom, and then the post-oil boom. The first period is known, as we all know, was a period in which Nigeria engaged basically in agriculture. Agriculture was like the basic economic activity for them. And then we moved on to the oil boom. The oil boom is a period or an era in the years or periods of like 1970s thereabout, known for the exploitation and discovery of oil. As a result of that, during this period, the revenue was increased, and as a result of that, also spending of the government also was increased. Government was solely dependent on this oil boom. Then we moved on to the post-oil, identified with keynotes of debt financing. It's a situation whereby, as a result of the inability of or a downfall in the revenue generated from oil, the government started to source for funds by borrowing loans, and also as a result of that, then we moved on to the diversification effort, whereby concept like taxation, and also more focus was also placed on agriculture. So what then is fiscal strategy? Basically, fiscal strategy is the use of government revenue, expenditure, and debt to promote growth. As we all know, growth is the increased production in goods and services, and then this will also lead to employment. And when I mean employment here, I don't mean just employment of human beings. I mean the full employment, the use of resources. Also, they can use this fiscal strategy to combat inflation, which is a persistent rise in prices of goods and services. And then finally, development in all sectors of the economy. So we quickly took a comparative analysis between Nigeria and two of the G7, simply because, and that is USA and UK, simply because of their economic strength. And then revenue, in terms of their revenue, Nigeria is seen to have about 67% of their revenue gotten from oil, import duties, and the rest. For USA, we can see that it's based on the income tax, payroll tax, and then, well, time wouldn't permit, so we'll jump quickly to expenditure. For Nigeria, according to statistics for the budget 2023, Nigeria incurred for recurrent expenditure an amount basically approximated to like 36.07% on recurrent expenditure, and like 30.07% also in financing their debt. But for USA, we can see Social Security, Medicare, the same applies to UK. Now, the fiscal policy, Nigeria focuses more on the expansionary, that is spending more, as I've earlier on said, while USA combines the both use of expansionary or contractionary policies. The same thing applies to UK. All right, so in this next slide, we are aligning the tenet of fiscal strategies with the social developmental goals. The reason why we're doing that is simply because it is becoming a trend how that the measurement of the development of a country will no longer be based on their GDP alone, but based on its ability to be able to attain these social development goals. And we brought this up as a result of key information being passed by the UN. As we can see here, they said that UN estimates that an amount of $4.2 trillion would be needed in order to be able to achieve social development goals. So as a result of this, government also are supposed to work in line with social development goals in order to be able to develop an effective fiscal strategy, down to also climate. All of this are supposed or should be factored also in the development of fiscal strategy. My partner here will continue.
It is on this basis that my colleague has built up that we are coming up with a new strategy for fiscal policy. And this is highlighted on the three major parts of fiscal policy or fiscal strategy, right? So revenue generation, resource allocation, debt management, and then we'll look at SDG later. Now, for revenue generation, diversification. If you diversify our revenue, you have more, right? So how do we diversify our revenue? Encourage production. How do you encourage production? You want to incentivize production. We are already doing that, yes. We are already doing that. There are several incentives to production. There is the pioneer status incentive and a host of others. But that is not enough because we are giving these incentives without measuring them. Measure the impacts of tax incentive, and where they are not fully effective, such measures can be changed, and then we can adopt new measures. Then revenue generation, we are also suggesting that consumption should be taxed. Whether consumption or production, the truth is there will always be a disincentive to taxation. People will not want to pay tax, whether consumption tax or production. But for a country like Nigeria, there should be more focus on consumption taxes. And as we go further, we'll come back to this for a particular reason. Now, growing the informal sector. In order for us for revenue generation to be improved, we have to grow the informal sector. Taiwo Oyedele said, the informal economy should not be targeted for tax extraction. The informal economy is not there so that you will be taxing them. No. You will want to be able to grow this informal economy so that they get to the point where returns from them and taxes generated from them become significant to the economy. So that should be our focus as we move on in our fiscal strategy. Now, we also propose expanding the tax base as a way of generating more revenue. To enhance the tax base, we are looking at technology and the block space. Many people are doing tap swap. Many people are doing are into cryptocurrencies and all of that. Do you know how this affects inflation? Okay, the government of the day might not be able to curb. They are making policies. In fact, some of these things, I know we are here now, so we want to do them, and then you are restricted by VPN, but by your location as a Nigerian, you switch VPN. And the government keeps saying, don't do, but trying to make efforts to stop people from doing it, but people keep finding ways. So instead of trying to curb it completely, instead of sending EFCC or the police, okay, stopping boys and harassing boys, why not we look into taxing this sector significantly? And this can only be done if we leverage on data, which is the next step there. There is significant need to leverage on data and the technology in increasing the tax base of our country. Resource allocation. Expenditures of government should be more of capital than recurrent. In the budget, like my colleague has given statistics about the budget, how that the recurrent expenditure for this year's budget is more than the capital. In fact, debt service is more than the capital expenditure. Debt servicing is close to the capital expenditure. So we need more of capital infrastructures. Okay, I'm not to call the name of my school, but from where I was coming from to this road, at some point you are on the road and you're like, wow, what's this? So then there should be more of public-private partnership. A group highlighted on that, so I might just keep emphasis on that. Then fiscal discipline. Our economy, our leaders need to be disciplined fiscally. That is the way we can manage our expenses. Coming to the debt, what is the debt management office doing? Yeah, they should negotiate better debt terms for us as a country, because yes, for now, we still need debt. We need debt as a country, but there should be long-term debt planning. Don't just plan for borrowing because of the next year. What about future years? When are we going to stop borrowing? When will our budget become budget surplus and no longer budget deficit? Then debt sustainability, infrastructure-oriented debt only. Why are you borrowing to pay salaries? Why? Then strategies for fiscal SDG budgeting, for SDG alignment. We are saying green budgeting, social impact board, and taxation for SDGs. Green budgeting, from the name, I believe it should be clear. Then social impact bonds. For social impact bonds, we are saying that there should be a bonds are debt instrument issued by the government, right? So the government should be able to facilitate a way where they give you, where the debt they collect from you is for you to make a particular impact in the society, and then they measure that. So for an effective strategy, we are sure that all these people need to be in place. A strong and focused Ministry of Finance. There should be parliamentary oversight. The parliamentarians must work. Our National Assembly, they must work for fiscal strategy to be in place. Revenue agencies must smartly achieve their target. It must be done smartly now, not through some other schemes. A working fiscal responsibility commission. We do have a fiscal responsibility commission. What are they? Then the debt management office. And then I also include citizens, because at this point, citizens have a lot to do. So thank you. And finally, this is what we envision: fiscal strategies that do not tax poverty and that do not do any of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll be taking questions from the contestants and judges. Just one question. Okay.
Okay, you mentioned something about climate change, about how we should invest in climate change. And I'm very particular about climate change, but like Nigeria already has a problem financing its debt, and climate change is not particularly cheap. So do you have a particular strategy for how we'll be funding climate change structures? For example, the blue economy is a very expensive, it's a very expensive climate change solution. So how do you plan for us to fund these ideas?
Not just the climate change, but several other SDG goals, right? So there are a lot of things for us to be done. I will come with the blue economies. The blue economy is affected by what? Plastics in water, right? And a lot of other factors that affect the blue life. So this measure can really be, the blue economy can be helped through measures already in the blue economy. We have plastics that are really affecting this, right? So providing a safe blue economy will be measures such as making use of these same plastics, which affect water, because I know I've watched documentaries several times about how plastics are the major factor affecting the blue economy. So if plastics themselves, and actors of my school will convert plastics to polish for you. So that is already a way of handling it. So there are already means of solving some of these problems that are in place. So challenges facing the blue economy, which was what we are particular about, I would recommend those issues that affect them. Those issues that affect them can, like the plastic I spoke about really is just the best example I could give now. The plastics, pick them, convert them to instrument, and profits from this can be used to protect that area. So that's for that.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm very, very impressed. However, I have two, not controversial, but you can say it's a controversial anyway. We are talking about tax here. You are trying to link these strategies to tax, so to say. And tax is actually built on law. I was actually wondering why, I don't know, maybe the last team will talk about it. But everything you are going to say or you need to tell us should have a precedence in law, or should a law have to be enacted for you to implement this? In tax laws, what is not there is not there. You cannot use your imagination or what you think or emotion or what you think is right to introduce anything into tax. You have to rely on the instrument of law to prove any point. So when we are talking about all this strategy, where is the place of the law in all this? That is one. Then in your comparison, Nigeria, UK, and US, I think we should always compare apple with apple, orange with orange. For Nigeria and US and UK, they are not on the same pedestal at all. And we all know that these countries, they are known as developed countries. While we are, let me say, maybe we are still developing, or we have the future to develop. So I don't know the basis where you are comparing this. I think next time you should try and use other countries that are in our sect, that we are all developing in Africa. Then we can now see what we are doing, what they've done, what we can do, and then we can have a robust strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those observations. I will start with the last one. First of all, let me say we use green because we believe in growth. Clap for us. So that aside, now some of these things from the team is reimagining fiscal strategies. So some of the things are being really, we sat down, look at what is happening now. That was why for us, we had to give those background. We looked at what is happening, and then we began to reimagine what could it be. So it's not that there are existing laws in ground for some of these things, but we are saying there could be laws to promote some of these things. That's what we are saying. Then for the, that also addresses, so of we making comparisons, actually, we in the point of preparing the slides, to be honest, we saw that, and we tried to look for data for some countries, and we were like, these G7s, their data are already there. It was easy to really get them, and then we just had to work with them. And it's also we envisioning ourselves to become great. Thank you.
You are trying to look at the impact of fiscal strategies on those economies vis-a-vis Nigeria, instead of accepting defeat by saying, oh, we didn't see data.
As for individuals, just to add this, sometimes you don't have to try to be too smart. Yeah, Nigerians, we try to play that we are too smart. That is one of the reasons why we comply with tax policies.
A round of applause for Team C, please. Thank you very much. So next up, we'll be having the final competitor, and that will be Team B.
The Nigerian economy is like the myth of Sisyphus and its rolling stone. We keep pushing and pushing for growth in our economy, and yet we find ourselves exactly where we began, which is nowhere at all. Therefore, we are here today to make recommendations that will not only allow us to push for economic growth, but to actually remain at that peak. Good day, panel of judges, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chidera Okoro, and I'm here with my colleague, Oreoluwa Adejumo. And we will be speaking on the policy presentation, Reimagining Fiscal Policy for Economic Growth and Development. First, let's look at the definition of economic policy. Economic policy are the measures taken by the government in order to strengthen and build its economy. It can be divided into fiscal policy, monetary policy, and trade policy. However, in line with the topic today, we'll be focusing on fiscal policy. In particular, we'll be looking at 3 fiscal strategies, which are taxation, debt management, and currency valuation. Now on to taxation. Taxation is a very paradoxical phenomenon in Nigeria. This is because, despite the many problems of taxation, such as tax evasion, double taxation, poor administration, it is still a veritable source of revenue for the Nigerian government. As a matter of fact, the FIRS projected that they would only make 11 trillion from tax in 2023. But in reality, they made over 12 trillion. So now let's imagine taxation within this economy without all the many problems that it currently has. For a good tax system, there needs to be a synergy of 3 factors, which is the policy, the law, and the administration. Today, we will be giving recommendations on the policy and the administration. Therefore, onto the policy. We recommend that the Nigerian government should make sector-specific policies in their national tax policy. This means that they would identify the key sectors in Nigeria and will make provisions in the national tax policy as to how to regulate and promote growth within these particular sectors. As a matter of fact, in identifying the key sectors, the Nigerian government, working together with stakeholders, would identify their influence on the Nigerian economy, which is their rate of employment, their revenue generation, and their tax compliance. And they would determine what sectors are key and determine and deserve these regulations. Let's take the digital content creation industry as an example. This industry is very key in promoting cultural value and revenue and tourism within this country. According to the Statista Revenue Research Department, Nigeria made $17.3 billion from tourism alone in 2022. So if the digital content creation industry were to receive support and in terms of provisions, sector-specific provisions in the national tax policy, these would ensure that this sector has governmental backing and would ensure the flourishing of the sector and in turn would lead to economic growth and development for Nigeria. But it's impossible to talk about policy without looking to administration. The major problem in Nigeria's tax administration is that we work on the honor system. However, the fact is, Nigerians are not honorable. So instead of trusting the conscience of our citizens, let us look towards enforcing their tax by removing the lack of registration. And we suggest that the government should use technology to remove the lack of registration within Nigeria. In particular, we suggest the MOSIP system. The MOSIP system stands for the Modular Open Source Identity Platform. And what it does is, it comes into a country and enhances the existing ID technology there. And it also looks to the realities of its society and its economy in building a national identity system. This national identity system would also be accompanied by a tax registration number. And the other sectors in the economy would help in enforcing tax compliance by refusing to allow any industry or any person to partake in commercial activities if they do not show or prove their tax compliance through the tax registration number provided in this particular system. Therefore, we suggest that the government should impute these suggestions in taxation in order to cause economic growth and development. I will now concede the floor to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Chidera. As earlier introduced by my colleague, my name is Oreoluwa Adejumo, and I shall be examining fiscal strategies for debt management and naira devaluation. First of all, we shall look at naira devaluation. What shall it profit a man who borrows to pay his rent, borrows to eat, when he has a fixed income of 150,000 naira in Nigeria today. Now compare this person with another individual who directs his debt or borrowing to investing in certain businesses. He will be able to give returns and repay back the debt within a matter of time. Take the national budget, for example. In 2024, we projected an aggregate expenditure of 27.50 trillion and an aggregate revenue of 18.32 trillion. And here we see a deficit of 9.18 trillion. The Nigeria government, when it does this, when it creates a budget that it cannot completely fund, it covers the deficit by borrowing through internal or external sources. And here we have seen that it consistently has to borrow and allocate debt servicing in the budget. And as we see here, the debt servicing here is 8.25 million, which is the second highest allocation on this particular budget. Hence, Nigeria can be likened to that disillusioned individual, as we see the steady rise in our debts. In a perfect budget, the total operating expenditures is equal to the total operating revenue. Hence, how can we halt this cycle of impending doom? I prefer a fiscal consolidation plan with 3 steps. First, we control the primary deficit. Secondly, we direct the debts to investments. And finally, we deleverage the economy. On the first point, to control primary deficits, we do this by using expansionary fiscal contraction policies. And what this will entail is that fiscal consolidation through reduced public spending and social expenditures, and also wage adjustments. This will lead to using fiscal contractionary tools, which will lead to an expansionary effect. Secondly, we have to prioritize the use of debt to finance investment rather than recurring expenditures. It is very important that while we recognize borrowing to be a very good source of generating wealth and impacting the economic development, we need to understand that this is only made possible when those debts are directed to investment and not just recurring expenditures without giving any returns. This, as Nigeria has done, we are effectively mortgaging our future incomes without having a way to pay back the returns. On the final note, we need to deleverage the economy. Deleveraging the economy refers to the process of reducing public and private debts and expressed in the ratio of a total debt to GDP ratio. When the government borrows to finance the deficit, the spending is reduced. This pushes down interest rates and generally encourages higher private investments. And this is very important in our Nigerian economy today. On the final point, we highlight the urgency of Naira devaluation. It is important to note that before any of the wonderful or beautiful strategies that have been put out today, we see what the Naira is and we see what the cost had been within the last 2 years. It is astronomical, and it has to. There needs to be direct strategies to combat this at the immediate effect. As of today, the current rate of Naira is $1,935. Nigeria is facing the worst of its inflation as the rate rose to 33.95% in May of 2024, which makes this the highest reading since 1996. As a nation filled with proud men, it is sad to see Nigeria lose its steeze and composure as we resort to using cucumbers to cook stew because we cannot afford pepper. This inflation affects every single one of us. Hence, we need to understand the strategies for resolving this forex crisis. We are preferring a multi-pronged approach, which is necessary to encompass measures to boost domestic production, enhance market confidence, and implement sound fiscal and monetary policies. There needs to be a comprehensive adjustment program that is going to be headed by experts who understand the ins and outs of foreign exchange markets. Foreign exchange market is like every other market. It has demand and supply side. Hence, we need to understand how to impact and influence this. Unlike the CBN, which they had used, admittedly, foreign exchange tools, but this had only caused a had only caused an artificial effect, an artificial change, which cannot last in the long term. We need something that is more long term for the necessary production, and hence we recommend to enhance the domestic production in Nigeria and restore confidence and encourage investment in infrastructure, diversing the economy through looking at the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy, which is something that can take over from oil in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. My questions are on some comments you made. You spoke about fiscal policy and naira devaluation, and you tried to draw it towards inflation. Yes, inflation, the rising prices of goods and services, right? Sure. My question is that for economic growth to actually take place, or what is associated with economic growth of every nation is a level of inflation. So, judging from that, how do you tend to manage the fact that inflation will still have to exist in Nigeria and for economic growth to be possible, but still we achieve economic growth and development through our fiscal strategies? Then another question is that you made mention of returns on investment, fiscal investment, and one will wonder what sort of investment should the government be making at this time? Investment in what exactly? What are those investments that you are saying we should borrow for? Because for me, during our presentation, we are like investment in infrastructures, and we can actually factualize how infrastructure investment can lead to a multiplier effect in the long run in the economy. So how do you envisage that these investments, or give particular areas where you see government making investment that can engineer returns? Then talk about foreign exchange stability. Do you know that foreign exchange and that fiscal policy is just one side of the coin, that there is another thing called monetary policy, and then it's the blend of these two that works together to actually make the economy grow, and then that fiscal policy has a lag, a delay, because fiscal policy waits for the budget and everything to be approved before it's actually being implemented, unlike the monetary policy, which in part is actually effected soon. So you lambasted the CBN's policy. It was because you lambasted the CBN's policy, that was why I have to draw this. And how would you actually blend the two now? Where does monetary policy and fiscal policy come in? Or are you saying we should do away with those monetary policy measures that have been taken by the CBN? Thank you.
And it's kind of in alignment with the question your co-contestants just asked. I want to be very sure that you know the distinction between fiscal policy and monetary policy. And maybe inflation rates and the naira devaluation of all those things you just said, they're actually part of monetary policy. But we can't rule out the fact that the two of them are actually kind of mutually coexist, and they can use it to kind of tinker the economy or whichever way. So that is what I want to actually clarify. Do you really know that you are mixing the fiscal policy with monetary policy, or you just deliberately did it? Maybe you know or you don't know. That is the question I want to pose at you. That is why. Then your presentation, well, I have the hard copy, and I was trying to go through it, but I've not been able to do justice to it. Overall, I'll be speaking to all the presentation that we have today. And just like someone pointed out, it is actually reimagining. Yes, it's an imagination. What it could have looked like. How can we get there? And when we get there, what are we going to be doing? And I've stated earlier on that, you see, this is an academic discourse anyway, and most of the discussions and the takeaway from here can be used at the national stage. However, we need to be very careful some statements we make, and we should not actually try to play down what is existing just because we are trying to reimagine what it can be. Nigeria is doing a lot, I look at the tax laws, and I look at it that, yes, why it might not be just too adequate, but it's kind of adequate. And one part that we should be looking at in taxation is the compliance. Because tax is actually the major fiscal tool that you can use. Then the other is the government spending. When you make the money through taxation, how do you spend it? And that is what is exactly the embodiment of the whole fiscal strategy that we are talking about. So when governments make this money, how do they spend it? But let's not, we're not going to be talking about how government is going to spend it, because like we said, mostly in taxation, this is a tax club. We are not so particular about what government, how they spend it. What we are looking at is how do we make it. And in making this money, compliance has actually been the major problem. The tax law, even though it's adequate, the compliance part of it on even the formal sector and the informal sector, household and everything, it is actually very low. And that is why you need to do a lot of audits, desk audit, routine audits, investigation, just because you want to get to the point where you have all your tax. Are you paying tax? Then are you paying the correct amount? I hope you understand it. This is not actually a question anyway. I'm only contributing to the discourse generally. So is this sufficient? Are you paying the correct amount? Because if you are not paying the correct amount, then what's the point? You cannot just decide that I want to give government anything I decide, except you are relying on the law, which is tax avoidance, not evasion anyway. So is it sufficient what you've done? Did you comply? So when you are writing all this presentation, we have to be looking at, we have to imagine what the taxpayers too should do. Because all this presentation has actually focused on what government should do. But I am now saying, what should a taxpayer do? Let's imagine what they should do too. I watched a film recently, Young Sheldon, and you saw where that little boy was actually helping the family to compute. Even the household, they were remitting, they were actually filing return for their household. So let's us be looking at how do we make this money, because when we make this money, that's when we can now start looking at how do they spend it and how is it actually helping us to reposition or to take our economy to the next level. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you very much, sir.
Just one comment from me, and I think it's a function of presentation, right? I don't know who mentioned it, that Nigerians are not honorable. So when you're on the podium speaking to people, always try to speak good about Nigeria, because Nigeria is a great country. Thank you.
Okay, so in line with the judge's question, well, you said it wasn't exactly a question about tax compliance. Well, we have to say that what the taxpayer can do is actually in line with our MOSIP system. So what the MOSIP system does, like I said, is to provide for comprehensive registration. And this doesn't mean that every Nigerian citizen is going to have to come out again to once again register or do their fingerprints or biometrics or anything like that. The MOSIP system already enhances the current process that is within Nigeria, which would mean a transfer from the NIN system to the MOSIP system with simply an addition of a tax identification number for the purpose of taxation. You asked, what would the taxpayer do? Well, the only thing the taxpayers, Nigerians, can do is to ensure that they comply with this MOSIP system. For the people that are not already registered, they can do more to register. While we cannot control the actions of the Nigerian citizens, it is essential that they do play their part by remitting their taxes, by declaring their income, and by registering as well. Thank you.
I'll now address the questions on Naira. Okay, I'll first of all start from the questions of my colleague. His question was, do I know inflation is necessary in economic growth? Yes, I do know, but to an extent. You would not meet any finance expert who will tell you inflation should just keep rising. It is not going to benefit anybody after a reasonable point. So the key thing here is the reasonability. Because of the impact of the Naira valuation, it has reduced it has reduced purchasing power, and there is so much money running through the system right now. However, it cannot buy or purchase what it used to. And this in itself is a problem. At this point, if you keep on going, it shall get to a stage where we are unable to sustain ourselves. We're unable to sustain even the economic growth and development which we seek for Nigeria. You also asked a question about where is the money supposed to go to. Just like I said, it's supposed to go to investing in infrastructure, investing in emerging areas, and trying to support the different businesses that we have in Nigeria. So it is very important that while we understand certain limitations that could possibly be there when it comes to, when it comes to the budgeting, we understand and we know that it is very important that for investment has to go into a particular, it has to go into a fund or into a portfolio that is going to bring returns, even if it is not a short term, in the long term, within 5 years, within 10 years. The current administration had taken the right step when it created the portfolio for the Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy. So right now, this ministry is in its baby stage. It is important to monitor this particular ministry and ensure that you get the maximize the amount of revenue that you can possibly get from it, because this is something that is funding a lot of countries who do not even have other natural resources, but of course they have water resources and borderlines, so they are able to cater to their environment. We cater to Africa. You see the ports in Lagos, you see the ports in Port Harcourt. These are places that you need to properly improve their infrastructure. You need to contribute to sustainable practices which will ensure that the blue economy is not just a new economy, it is something that is sustained over time. Now, on to the question about the question of my judges where they asked about the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. Yes, we understand that the topic is reimagining fiscal strategies, but fiscal strategies alone cannot be reimagined in a vacuum. You have to reimagine it as well as stating certain points that we can do when it comes to monetary policy. It is important to note that all of the solutions that have been preferred cannot be sustained if we are unable to manage the naira currency at the foreign exchange level. And this, of course, is monetary policy. The CBN had actually done certain foreign exchange control measures where they had gone into the market, they had started selling, dollar, and this was a very important control that aided to reduce the growing inflation rate and the growing margin between the naira and the dollar. However, it is important to note that this is not sustainable. If we do not attack or address these particular issues, within the next 2 years, within the next 2 months, in fact, we could be facing problems that will be out of our hands and could take 5 or even more years to resolve. So it's important that we realize the coming together of this monetary and fiscal policy, which is what our presentation tried to establish today. Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for Team B.
Okay, so the judges have finished collating the result of the National Tax Debate 8.0. So I'll be inviting the judges to announce the results. Please, a round of applause for him as he comes up on stage.
I can see you're all excited. This is the time that we've been waiting for, and I'm sure we all want to hear the results. Before we start announcing the results, I think I need to commend everyone from the executive of the tax club to the staff advisors to the club coordinator and every member of the tax club. You guys are awesome. Please clap for yourself. And it is not a competition, it's a game, and it is a learning platform. In fact, I learned a lot today, even as a professional that has been practicing law and accounting for over 15 years. I still learned a lot of things from you. Please clap for yourself once again.
Now we have gotten to the point where we announce the winner of the major debate. And not to take so much of your time, the third runner-up is Team He with 38.25 points. Can you come up, please, to get your award? Second runner-up is Team D.
Please, a round of applause for Team D. So that is the second runner-up. So in addition to their plaque, they'll be going home. They'll be going home with a sum of 150,000 naira. Round of applause for Team D.
So we're left with two teams. Can someone guess who won? All right. The first runner-up is Team C.
Please, a round of applause for Team C. They're the first runner-up and be going home with a sum of 350,000 naira, courtesy of the Unilag Tax Club.
You can throw your hands up, you can beat the clock, you can move a mountain, you can break rocks, you can be a master, don't wait for luck.
And to cap it all, the ultimate winner of the presentation is, do you know the winner already? Anyway, he's no any other team other than Team B, winning with 45.38. Well done, Team B.
The emperor, the conqueror, the champion, the lion is here. The emperor, the conqueror, the champion, the lion is here.
It's all better than that. Come on, make some noise for your champion. So our champions will be going home with 500,000 naira. A round of applause for our champions. Team B. From where? What school is this? What school is this? What school is this? What school is this? Come on now.
Let me congratulate the executive and the organizer of this year's Nigerian Tax Debate. This is the first time I'm coming here personally to attend this program. And it really shows that the future of tax administration and practice in this country is in safe hands. Congratulations to you. This type of platform is unique and critical to promoting international discussions in the field of taxation. As you are all aware, taxation is ever dynamic in nature and practice. Therefore, the Institute is happy to be associated with the Tax Club of the University of Nigeria.
Let me assure you that FRA does not take this tax club with levity. It is a project that we believe and we will provide the avenue for you to effectively play the role. The reason why this tax club is so important to FRS. It is our belief that the University of Lagos Tax Club will spread the taxation gospel to all parts of our nation using their vast knowledge in technology and social media communication to drive tax education and tax enlightenment. These and many more are the expectations of FRS from the young and dynamic member of this tax club, and it is our belief that you will play your roles in modeling our nation through revenue collection for Nigeria's sustainable growth, improved security, architecture, and infrastructural development without leaving out funding of quality education.